Janice Hayes, a 32-year-old self-made financial analyst, hosts a family birthday dinner that turns into an ambush. Her mother and relatives demand she sell her house and give the proceeds to her pregnant younger sister, Jennifer. Janice calmly reads aloud an email revealing her $2.4 million portfolio, refuses to be shamed into giving away her assets, and walks through the fallout: legal threats, family ostracism, boundary setting, charitable donations, estate planning, and new business opportunities. In the end, Janice protects her wealth, sets limits, helps in controlled ways, a $50,000 scholarship and modest trust, and finds emotional freedom and professional growth. 2. Narrative structure: beginning, conflict, climax, end. Beginning, we meet Janice through a first-person recount: background, hard work, academic success, family dynamics, golden child Jennifer versus Judge Janice, and the setup for a seemingly small birthday dinner where Janice hopes for approval. Conflict: at dinner, the family publicly pressures Janice to sell her house for Jennifer's baby fund. Humiliation, entitlement, and generational resentment surface. Janice's inner conflict: compliance, to avoid being ostracized, versus standing up for herself. Climax: Janice reveals her financials, $2.4 million portfolio, flipping the power dynamic. The table's reaction, the emotional confrontation, and Janice's final verbal refusal form the emotional peak. The aftermath: family leaves, threats, blocking, resolves immediate external conflict. End: Janice reorganizes: estate planning, a principled charitable donation, a measured educational trust for the niece, new business partnership, and emotional closure. She preserves autonomy, reframes what family means, and closes with empowerment. 3. Emotional hooks and impactful moments: birthday ambush, turning a joyful occasion into public shaming is instantly gripping. The family cheer when asked Janice to sell her home, visceral betrayal/revulsion. The bank email read aloud: $2.4 million, sudden role reversal, shock factor, crowd drop silence. Janice's calm, measured response rather than explosive anger, satisfying, empowered. Donation to scholarships versus family, moral complexity: she helps society but refuses family blackmail. Legal threat and dismissal, ratchets stakes and shows real-world consequences. New business opportunity, hopeful payoff, not revenge but thriving. 4. Elements that make the story go viral or relatable: family entitlement versus individual success, universal friction many people experience. Birthday betrayal trope, emotionally shareable, fuels outrage and solidarity. Wealth revelation twist, dramatic mic drop moment that plays well in short reels. Clear protagonist, earned success, versus villainous/ambiguous family, easy to root for. Moral ambiguity: she helps strangers instead of family, sparks debate and engagement. Strong, quotable lines, e.g., "I'm done setting myself on fire to keep someone warm, meme ready." Visual scenes, dining table, phone reveal, cars leaving, translate well to short film/thumbnail hooks. 5. Weak points, clichés, repetition, lack of depth, overfamiliar family archetypes, golden child, resentful parents, deadbeat uncle feel archetypal and predictable. Lengthy exposition in places, a real-time short film needs economy. Some moral decisions feel fully resolved too quickly, e.g., immediate donations spotlighted on social media as proof. Dialogue occasionally on the nose, characters state intentions rather than show subtlety. Janice's inner life could be deeper: we see actions but less of ongoing emotional vulnerability after the event. Jennifer's complexity is shallow, mostly entitlement, and nuanced motive, fear, insecurity, would deepen stakes. 6. Suggestions for improvement: tone, structure, character work, tighten opening, start in media res, the toast, the standing up, then pull back for flashback lines. Immediate hook. Deepen Jennifer, show small moments that humanize her, fear about being a mom, insecurity, so the audience's feelings are conflicted. Show, don't tell, replace some explicit "you're selfish" dialogue with gestures and micro-expressions. Vary Janice's response. Keep her calm but add internal cracks, small flashbacks or sensory cues that reveal cost of silence. Add subtext to parents. Reveal why mom favors Jennifer, guilt, nostalgia, loneliness, to create moral tension. Pace the reveal. Make the $2.4 million reveal cinematic, a beat of tension before reading, close-ups, sounds. End with ambiguous relational note. Don't tidy all family outcomes. Leave door open for future reconciliation or firm boundaries. Shorten scenes for real formats. Keep each beat punchy and image forward. 7. Ideal target audience: women 25 to 45 navigating career versus family expectations. Viewers who enjoy emotional short films, domestic drama, and empowerment narratives. Audiences on platforms like TikTok, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts who engage with cancel culture, family drama, and financial independence content. Fans of personal essay-style storytelling, e.g., Humans of New York, personal finance creators, and workplace-to-home boundary topics. Below is a rewritten, cinematic retelling that preserves the emotional core but tightens, deepens, and reframes scenes for an impactful short film/reel series. The living room smelled like lemon oil and something that had once been expensive furniture. Janice Hayes set the last candle into its brass holder, watched the flame shiver, and told herself not to picture how the evening might go wrong. Her phone lay face down on the coffee table, but the screen pressed a small glow through the wood like a heartbeat, the email she'd read at lunch that made her stomach tighten with secret satisfaction. She'd rehearsed a quiet birthday. Her friends would call at 7, the wine would be uncorked, and for one night she might be free of parents correcting the shape of her life. But this was Janice's family, which meant plans were only suggestions and knives were always served with dessert. When she opened the door, the house filled with people who treated warmth and admonishment like the same currency. Jennifer arrived first, and Janice felt a careful, practiced irritation at the way the younger woman's hand rested over her belly as if that small bulge could command countries. Brandon lingered behind her, the energy of a man who'd spent half his life learning how to sell confidence. "You should have turned the heat up," Jennifer said without looking at Janice, the complaint flung like a coin meant to buy attention. Janice smiled, the small civic smile of someone who'd learned to keep small fires from catching. She offered a throw, then a drink, then everything she had because she believed, still, that this was how family nights were supposed to look. They sat like a jury. Plates arrived, too much pasta, laughter that didn't reach their eyes, and Janice felt the old ache of being measured while invisible. Her parents arrived on cue, her mother with a shawl that smelled faintly of perfume and deflection, her father with the tired generosity of a man who'd wanted peace more than justice. Conversations floated like paper boats around the table: babies, complaints about the heat, an old story everyone revised to flatter the listener. Janice laughed at the right times. She poured wine, told a joke she'd told a dozen times, adjusted a centerpiece because habit is a kind of armor. She'd invited them into her world with good china and the soft accuracy of someone who likes lists. That was the punchline, she realized. She'd tried to make herself presentable for people who only ever saw the parts of her that made them uncomfortable. Under the table, her knee kept finding the edge of the box she'd pushed under the chair, the envelope from her bank, unopened on purpose before tonight. It was the private evidence of years lived thinly and wisely, extra shifts, cheap dinners, every dollar folded toward a future they assumed she didn't really want. Her mother cleared her throat. It was the sound of a program starting. "We need to talk about what really matters," she said into the candlelight as if that phrasing might soften what came next. Words like priorities hung in the air like moths. Janice tightened her fingers around the wine glass. She could taste metal. "We all agree," her mother announced. There was a ripple of applause, a social contract Janice hadn't signed. "You should sell your house and help Jennifer. She needs," and there it was, the soft violence of the request. Janice's first impulse was a laugh that cratered. This room, these voices, this theatrical tenderness, they had made careers out of admiring mediocrity and damning competence. She felt something weary and fierce fold into place. Tonight would not be about the china. It would be about whether the life she'd built could be dismissed with a toast. She reached for her phone. When Janice found the email earlier that day, it had landed like a discreet medal in her inbox. Nothing flashy, an automated note from her portfolio manager acknowledging a milestone. She read it at her desk between spreadsheets, the words folding into her like a small, private triumph. Assets under management have exceeded $2.4 million. She smiled, then pushed the joy aside. Pride in private is a different animal than pride in public. One is warmth, the other is a target. Now, at the table, she held the revenge of restraint. She would not raise her voice until she had something worth hearing. Her mother continued, a practiced cadence, painting sacrifice as virtue. Her sister's eyes were wet with a rehearsed devotion. Around them, relatives prodded and cheered as if the asking were a kind of entertainment. What I don't understand, her cousin said, mouthful of garlic, is how someone can live like that and not share. It was less a question than a verdict. Janice heard herself swallow. She felt older than the woman with the pregnancy glow and younger than the room full of people who'd never seen her climb. Janice's memory skittered back, early mornings in college, the smell of elevators in a building that scraped the sky, ramen dinners swallowed between study sessions and shifts at a salon. She could still feel the pinch of coin in her palm when she put it into savings, the discipline that had slowly accreted until it became a weight she could finally lift. Those memories were not trophies for anyone else. She watched Jennifer trace circles on her bump like a metronome. There was fear there, thin, quick and almost invisible, despite the performance. Janice considered that possibility. Maybe her sister was terrified, maybe she wanted security more than spectacle. But fear is not a pass to rewrite ownership. Charity can be given, but entitlement is not generosity. The room's temperature seemed to shift toward accusation. Her father, who often collapsed into agreement like a man seeking shelter, added in his hesitant baritone, "We worry about legacy." Family. The word legacy slid like a blade. Janice swallowed a rising retort. Legacy, to them, read as who they could keep afloat with someone else's toil. Her fingers brushed the envelope beneath the table. She'd considered unfolding this night a dozen ways, the stealthy reveal, a private conversation, a quiet gift of financial security for a niece. She'd even planned to offer something modest, a trust for education that would not become a cudgel. But that plan had been private. Now it felt like a promise being demanded by a crowd who'd applauded mediocrity. When her mother stood, it was place-setting theater. She spoke of family values, of bearing burdens together. The room nodded as if to a sermon. Janice felt the old, familiar ache of being the family's moral ledger, expected to balance deficits created by others. She could have gone along, apologized and signed the sale papers and become the archetypal martyr who sleeps on someone else's benevolence. Instead, she folded her hand around the glass and steadied the tremor that sometimes rose when anger and exhaustion braided together. She remembered a mentor who once told her that power looks like calm. Not the loud defiance of a wounded woman, but the quiet of a door that no longer opens. There was a beat she let herself savor. The room was waiting for her to crumble. She would disappoint them, of course, that had always been her function. But exhaustion can turn into clarity. She had the chance, right there amid the Olive Garden and the forced tears, to change the narrative. Her voice, when it came, was not a shout. It was precise, clinical, and used the language that had built her life, numbers. "I think you should hear something," she said. She reached for the phone. The screen's light made a small island on the polished wood as Janice unlocked her phone. Time slowed. The clinking of forks sounded too loud, like props in a play. For a heartbeat she saw the faces around the table as if through a camera lens, expectant, smiling, predatory, and then she read. "Dear Ms. Hayes, We are pleased to inform you that your assets under management have exceeded $2.4 million as of today's market close. The words were clinical, unimpeachable. Janice's voice was steady as she spoke them. Each syllable landed in the room like a pebble in a pond, the ripples spread. There was an audible intake of breath, forks hung midair. Her mother's face, which had been flushed with righteous certainty, briefly blanked into something like shock. Jennifer's eyes flared, not with shame, but with a quick, fragile calculation. Janice felt the delicious, terrible clarity of the reveal. She had never wanted this moment for the spectacle, she'd wanted it to be a quiet seed of security. But spectacle is what family dinners become when entitlement sits at the head of the table. Before tonight, they'd believed they could name the price of her autonomy without consulting her. Brandon's mouth opened and closed, an untrained animal trying to learn a new cue. The cousin who had been most vocal about sharing glanced away. The applause of a minute earlier now seemed ridiculous. Someone whispered, 2.4, as if the number itself might be a spell. The shift was not purely financial. Power at the table reoriented. Janice watched small predatory smiles retract like claws. Her mother's posture changed, less sermonizer, more calculation. Pride and envy warred on faces she'd known since childhood. She felt absurdly, painfully proud to have kept this secret until a moment when silence would have been complicity. Janice could have traded explanation for vindication, delivered a theological lecture on fairness, exposed old grievances like currency. Instead, she let the data do the work. That's the portfolio, she said. Not including the house. She placed the phone back on the table with a soft, final sound, like a gavel. Silence folded. Then the rhetorical wheels began again, requests retooled as entreaties, as if they were not occupiers demanding reparations. We only want what's best for family, her mother said in a voice that veered between plea and order. You're in a position to help. The plea craned toward sanctimony, help rebranded as duty. Janice thought of nights hunched over textbooks, of sleeping on couches between jobs, of the compounding interest that had quietly converted austerity into stability. She had not become wealthy for the applause, she had done it to buy freedom. Freedom had a price, and tonight everyone in the room seemed unaware that autonomy could belong to her alone. Her sister's facade cracked briefly, there was a flicker of something human under the performance, worry about diapers, fear of being alone, a whispered, I don't know how to do this. For a second Janice's resolve trembled, compassion could make even the most stubborn woman soft. But then she caught the line of Jennifer's shoulders when she straightened. Entitlement reasserted itself in the way Jennifer demanded admiration without asking questions. The turning point was not a shout but a decision, she would not be guilt into liquidation. She would not convert her years of practice into someone else's narrative. I could help, she said, measured, but not this way. Her calm unnerved them. They had expected either immediate capitulation or a theatrical explosion. Instead they received the worst thing, refusal that looked like thoughtfulness. At that, her mother's patience frayed. Tempers edged, corners of manners turned sharp. Janice watched the twist she'd engineered do its work, the family had presumed a different ending. Now they had to face a protagonist who refused their script. After the reveal, the table split into smaller storms. Voices clustered into islands of negotiation and accusation. Her father pleaded for reconciliation with the weary diplomacy of a man who wanted softness at the end of his day. Aunt Carol tried to mediate, wagging sentimental logic like a handkerchief. But the air had changed. What had been a carefully staged ambush had exploded into a trial without a judge. Janice realized the stakes had moved beyond money. This was about who gets to define family, with love framed as obligation and generosity packaged as ownership. She watched her mother, who once read bedtime stories about virtue, turn into a prosecutor who expected Janice to admit guilt for success itself. You're selfish, Jennifer said, a repetition of the chorus Janice had heard her whole life. But this time the word landed back on the family like a boomerang. Janice thought of all the nights she'd eaten last, of the scholarships she'd almost forfeited and the indignities accepted for the sake of a future she'd wanted for herself. If selfish meant choosing not to be erased, she accepted the label. Her anger rose, not as a shout but as a quiet accumulation. She thought of the trust she'd planned discreetly for her niece, a protective measure, not a surrender. She'd intended to balance kindness and autonomy, a small educational fund, structure so the child would not be pawed at by adults. That plan had been private, now their demand threatened to make her generosity into a ransom. Her voice stayed precise. "If you're so concerned about Jennifer, why not look at what you can give?" she asked. It was a mirror held up without theatrics. The question was rhetorical. It forced them to consider receipts they preferred to forget. Her father looked away, the argument of who had sacrificed what became messy when inspected. "You're painting us as villains," her mother said, wounded. The theatrical turn of hurt had always been the family's currency. "We just want to help." "Help doesn't look like commandeering someone else's life," Janice replied. "And it doesn't look like applause." She closed her eyes for a second, letting the fatigue of years of carrying silence collect and harden into resolve. "If you want to help Jennifer, we can set up structures that actually support a child, education funds, childcare options, job training. But selling my house isn't charity. That's takeover." Uncle Ray, who'd been most ardent in the moralizing, tried an old gambit, blame. "We raised our kids different," he said, as if missing meals and failed businesses were the family's shared menu for moral supremacy. Janice countered not with recrimination but with facts, a modest trust for education, a refusal to be paraded as a bank, and a call to adult responsibility. The room frayed. Phones came out, tempers signed themselves into texts. Someone mentioned lawyers, thin threats that carried the energy of a man hoping noise could substitute for right. Janice felt a new coldness, but it was a clean one, clarity replacing the sticky doubt she'd carried for decades. She rose then, not for drama but to clear plates. The physical act of cleaning felt like a reclaiming ritual, removing remnants of a night in which she'd been asked to remove the cornerstone of her life. She moved with a steady economy, every gesture a punctuation mark. "This is my house, these are my rules, and I will not be deputized into someone else's survival plan." When they left, the slamming of doors was loud enough to echo up the hallway. The walk to the front window felt like a slow film, people piling into cars, the breath of the night visible in the headlights. Her mother's cab pulled away last, shoulders hunched in a way that made Janice's chest hurt with a small, unexpected ache. She felt relief, and a clear, keen sorrow too. Freedom always costs something. Inside, the house smelled of leftover sauce and perfumed indignation. Janice breathed. The night had asked everything and given one thing back, the knowledge of who she was, no longer negotiable. The night after the dinner, Janice's phone flooded with collisions, calls, texts, voicemails that swelled with outrage, betrayal, pity, and thinly veiled demands. She let them accumulate unread like falling leaves. Her hands, though, found practical work. She composed an email to her financial advisor with the clinical calm of someone cataloging evidence. Estate planning, she wrote, trust structuring, and a meeting to discuss investment properties. The language was not revenge, it was armor. Then came the lawyer letter, certified, performative, the sort of paper that wanted a court drama. A promissory estoppel threat scraped across her mailbox like a cheap blade. Janice laughed in the quiet way of someone who had stewarded spreadsheets through market cycles. She forwarded the letter to her attorney with a note, "Consider this a waste of time." Michelle called back in 10 minutes, and Janice heard amusement threaded through professional reassurance. The law could not reach into a life that had been defended by discipline and quiet competence. But the climax was not a courtroom spectacle. It arrived in two quieter, jagged moments that asked more of her than money could pay. First, the conversation with her mother on the porch. The figure who had led the charge to shame Janice sat and tried the old apology program, worn, soft, "We are proud." Janice listened to the words the way you watch winter thaw, slow, inevitable, and a little dangerous. "You were my child," her mother said, voice frayed. "I only wanted to protect Jennifer." The claim curdled in Janice's mouth. Protecting one child by attempting to erase the autonomy of another was not protection, it was a transaction that stripped dignity. Janice told her that, not with vitriol, but with a clarity that felt like confession and verdict combined. "I'm not your safety net," she said. The phrase landed like a hinge being closed. Then Brandon called. The man who'd once leaned on charm to buy calories of attention now asked for $50,000, an amount he framed as reasonable. Janice listened to his list of needs and found his tone shrinking into entitlement. "We're family," he said as if the word enhanced his credit. Janice's answer was surgical, "No." She catalogued the reasons. He'd made choices. He had options. Entitlement would teach nothing useful to a new life. His disappointment was not hers to fix. These two moments, intimate, hard, and almost painfully ordinary, felt like the summit of her battle. She had faced the crowd and the private interrogations alike, and her refusal was not a single shout but a sustained posture. The world would not implode because she protected her house. People might be angry, people might call her cruel. But cruelty is a matter of intent. Janice's intent had always been to be steward of her life, not a charity case for poor decisions. The final edge of climax came when she acted on the moral economy she'd always believed in. Instead of capitulating or hoarding wealth to gloat, she redirected it with intention, a $50,000 donation to a scholarship fund for first-generation students and a modest educational trust for her niece, strictly constrained to schooling expenses. The scholarship was anonymous to the family at first, an act of justice without spectacle. Then she posted the thank you letter publicly, not to gloat, but to mark a boundary. She wanted generosity to be principled, not coerced. The social media ripple did what social media does, it broadcasted values. Family found the post, friends cheered, critics opened their mouths. Her mother called furious. Janice let it go to voicemail. She had, in this crucible, learned that generosity cannot be a bargaining chip. As the neighborhood settled, Janice stood in the window watching the tail lights fade. She felt the strange hollow where old obligations had been. It was painful, but it was honesty. The climax had not been about winning, it had been about claiming the right to choose the shape of her life. She had refused to turn her house into a salve for other people's missteps, and in doing so she'd rediscovered the capacity to choose kindness on her own terms. Morning came like an honest light. Janice made herself eggs the way people make vows, slowly, with attention, as if the small domestic rituals could stitch the edges of a night that had frayed them. The house was quiet in a way that felt new. The silence was not loneliness, it was space she'd carved. She turned her phone on and watched the notifications bloom into a noisy, judgmental flower. She deleted most, kept the few that mattered. Amber's call landed like a lifeline. She'd laughed about the fake tears, celebrated the reveal, and then offered an opening no one in Janice's family had: partnership. Marcus, an old friend with a new firm, needed a founding partner. He said the words the night had trained her to accept: "You don't owe them your life. Build it." Janice met with Richard, sat across from Michelle, and talked about structure. Her estate plan became a manifesto of values, the bulk of assets to causes that reflected her struggle: scholarships, programs for working students, support for financial literacy. A small, tightly guarded educational trust would exist for her niece, funds for school, no access to parents. Boundaries were formalized into documents with the sterile beauty of legal efficiency. She felt empowered by the cold clarity of wills and clauses, decisions turned into sentences that protected the vulnerable without enabling dysfunction. The family, predictably, adapted to the new truth in small, petty ways. Uncle Ray posted scripture. Jennifer sent a message that oscillated between blame and a thin plea for help. Janice wrote a note and attached a $50 Target gift card for the newborn's diapers, practical, small. She stepped out of the theater of moral grandstanding and into the tradecraft of kindness that actually works. 3 months later, life presented an unexpected mercy. She and Marcus signed papers to found the investment firm. The world that had once tried to make her ashamed of money now gave her a company where glass ceilings were hypothetical things to be dismantled. Her name was placed on a door that had once been a dream scribbled on the inside of a budget book. The work was hard, the nights were long. But when she looked at the balance sheet months later, it reflected more than numbers. It reflected resilience. There were days her mother called and the conversation was brittle. There were holidays when the table felt too small for the distance between them. But moments arrived in the slant light that softened edges, an apology that was not perfect but honest, a cousin's text that read simply, "I see you." Small entries into a ledger that could not be forced. Janice spent an afternoon delivering a check to the scholarship fund. She watched a group of students, young, ragged with possibility, receive the first awards. One of them, a woman with paint-splattered fingers and a grin too bright for the world she came from, told Janice that the money meant she could stay in school another term. Janice felt something like home, not the one with slam doors and performative love, but a place built by tiny, deliberate acts that add up. On her birthday the next year she threw a small gathering, friends, colleagues, a careful selection of family. Jennifer sent a photo of the baby asleep in someone else's arms. Her mother left a vase with a card that said, "Proud." The card was guarded. Janice kept it in a drawer beside an envelope that listed the names of the scholarship recipients. She did not convert her life into spite. She did not block out everyone who'd hurt her. Instead, she lived according to a grammar of limits: love where it's earned, help where it's effective, protect what you've worked for. The house remained hers, not simply because of title deeds, but because it was the repository of choices she had made in the face of pressure. When she stood on the porch that evening and watched the sunset strip the sky of gold, she understood the small truth that had been taught to her by cold apartments and cheap dinners: independence is not loneliness. It's the capacity to refuse the bargain that requires you to sell your soul. She lifted her glass to the quiet horizon and tasted, finally, her own name.